Hello, US 102 US History CCAP classes. I'm just gonna go over, kind of summarize what we learned last week and talk a little bit about what to expect for this week um, as well. We're covering a lot of heavy and important material. And I think that for most of you, you will have been familiar at least with the topics, for example, World War II. So um, it's not like a lot of this information, at least the basic or the foundation of it, is something you're not aware of. Most of you probably even have in your family histories. I saw one student mention that I think it was her great grandfather or something was in one of the wars. I think it was World War II. So this is something, again, and even in film, it's enshrined. Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, all of that, and so on. But what I wanted to do is also crack open a more complex understanding of a lot of the variables that took place during these time periods. And I want to remind you also, I cover sometimes controversial and uncomfortable history as well. Um, Japanese internment camps or concentration camps, some people simply just call them that. Um, I covered also what happened to the Jews in the Holocaust, but I also discussed other groups that were not usually people did not think of as also having a problem with the Nazi regime, such as the Roma people or Romani, the uh, people that used to be called Gypsy, but we don't refer to them that way anymore. Um, and Jehovah's Witnesses, and so on. So I feel like I saw that a lot of you were all absorbing quite a bit and taking in. Wow, there was all of these things going on, other factors, and I compared how Jehovah's Witnesses were treated in the United States different than the Nazis, right? Now, by the way, Jehovah's Witnesses also had to deal with some things in the Soviet Union as well. But I didn't want to make this such a focus on one small American religious group, which is actually more or less international. I wanted to open up your minds or your ideas about the war and to show that there were so many more groups affected by what was taking place. And um, the Soviet Union, I don't know if I was able to really stress enough just how much they suffered as a result of the invasion of the Nazi force that repeated the same mistake, actually, that Napoleon did. Um, it's always tricky, because I'm always kind of leaving out something important because there's so much to cover, and at the same time, um, I don't want to overwhelm you with too much. The bottom line is, I'm hoping, that you just kind of always look at all these different bits and pieces of information as sparking an interest, and for you yourself to go out into a broader understanding of all these historical events. And even, of course, exploring the way that the LGBTQ plus community um, had a different set of circumstances during this time period as well. So again, I'm always trying to widen the spectrum of including people into the history that for many times did not get included, even though that they were there, okay, and participating in that history. Now we're moving on to the Cold War era. It's very important. And I'm also talking about immigration again, another controversial topic. So I just want to make very clear, you're going to see something, immigration policy that was put into motion during the Eisenhower era. And it uses a derogatory term for Mexicans that is racist and not acceptable. But this is what was said on the news. This is what it was called by our government. And so I left it as is because I think it's important for us to see how language gets used, how it changes, like what's same and what changes, but also like I don't know, it's a lot to unpack, but I think you understand. I'm hoping you're understanding why it was important for us to just be introduced to this important, often forgot part about history. Now, I incorporated another video talking about comparing Trump's current immigration policies to this one. This wasn't necessarily, you know, I couldn't avoid it because I watched discussions by, I think it was his head of ICE, Holman, refer to Eisenhower's policy. He didn't use the word, if I remember right, in the interview, but he referred to the policy. So, in other words, the current U.S. government and the actors involved are looking at this Eisenhower era policy and seeing it as a model, and people are critiquing them for wanting to use that model. So I think to not draw attention to that would do a disservice, because it's a part of history that lines up with what we're covering and is being brought into the forefront in today's politics, regardless of where you stand on all that. Okay, so that's what I'm doing there with that as we go in. And here's the last thing that I want to say. Just kind of talking about my posts that I've done on Iran, Iran, U.S. foreign policy, and where we're going. And I will end up having an opportunity to talk about this more come the end of the semester. I made my video post and the recording turned out awful, so I took it down. And then I made a short kind of set of history that I put down. And there's a lot left out there. And I know for a fact that I want to just really be clear that a lot of Iranian Americans have very, especially passionate feelings about what's going on. And really but I also want to say that within my own group of friends, I have Iranian friends and former students who want this war to happen. They want the regime to be replaced. There's others that I have that they may not be comfortable with the regime, but they don't think that war and dropping bombs on Iranians is the answer to what they're about. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's not one opinion, and I kind of mentioned that in there before, but and also some of my friends that came from Iran and former students, their families did well under the Shah, and then they thought that he was a good person. I mentioned him as an authoritarian, if you paid attention to it, okay? But I'm using textbook language to describe certain things. I mean, the fact of the matter is, every regime, some people do better under those regimes than others. I have other friends that actually had family that participated in the revolution to overthrow the Shah, but then ended up getting persecuted. And their family was persecuted by the Shah, but then also persecuted by the Islamic Republic. And then I know others that actually have a more positive view of that, believe it or not. I know it's not what a lot of you would expect. So, look, there's, like I said, this part of the world is something that I focused on in my undergraduate college life at UC Santa Cruz. And I'm not going to go any further detail right now, just to say that mainstream media is very painful in terms of putting context or other perspectives into just how to look at what's going on. And if on Zoom office hours, if anybody wants to contact me and actually, ask questions on that, feel free to go into that. But that's all I'll say for now. The last thing to just end us on is that whatever your politics or your opinions about the U.S. role in the world and all these things, this was deeply rooted in the Cold War and Cold War strategy and thinking that we are opening up into. And I can't stress enough how important it is to understand what this term means and the history behind it. Korea, Vietnam, and the Red Scare, the idea of of focusing on communism as the main problem of the world, to the point that still, for many political leaders, it's still something pejorative. You call somebody a socialist or a communist. It's very much rooted in this time period. Later on, I'll explain to you why I think that U.S. foreign policy was more coherent then, while it's much less coherent now. And what I mean is, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, you're going to see a consistent pattern historically. The U.S. government will support any regime no matter what they do, no matter what their human rights track record is, no matter what, as long as they're anti-Soviet, as long as they're against the communist regimes, and the Soviet Union in particular. And sometimes the US would even support a communist movement that is against the Soviet Union. So anything that's really against the Soviet Union, they're going to support. And the ends justify the means on that. That's the logic. And it's very consistent. If you look at the US foreign policy, it's not hard to follow. You can almost predict what choices are going to be made and what kind of activity is going to be taking place with the CIA and just foreign policy advisors. While now, with the fall of the Soviet Union, which we'll eventually get to, what are our reasons for the role that we have in the world? Yeah, this is the more tricky one, and we'll talk about that complexity more as we develop throughout this class, these topics.